做你这个行业的话，Unity 或者 Android Studio 是个不错的选择。啊，我用我的墨水屏来看吧，不然好像有点不舒适。Shift drag it down towards the center. Let's change the text to made by. Let's change the font size to something like 20. And change the font to Roboto. Again, we can duplicate this, move it down, and you can just write your name. I'm just going to write Brakes. Change the font size to 50 again, and font back to Roboto. There. I think that looks pretty good. Let's also take these two text elements and move them up a bit. And let's rename the first one to made by, and the second one to Brakes. Finally, we can create a button that will allow us to exit the game. So I'm going to right click on the credits, go UI, and then button. Let's move this down along the center. Let's scale it up. I don't want it to be too big. Then I'm going to show you some pretty cool button styling that I like to do. I like to take the source image and select none. Get a flat color. I like to leave this at completely white. Then I'm going to add a new component, and the component we want to add is shadow. Now this allows us to cast a hard shadow onto the background. I'm going to select 0 on the X and -2 on the Y. I'm then going to decrease the opacity. This gives it kind of a cool, simplistic mod look. I'm also going to make the button even smaller. Then we can change the text of the button, change the text to Crit, the font to Roboto regular, and the font size to something around 20. Maybe also make the color a bit lighter. I think that's better. So when you're satisfied with this, all we need to do is hook up the button to some kind of script. Let's go to our credits and add one. We can just go ahead and call it credits, and let's open it up in Visual Studio. Now, whenever we want to trigger some code using a button, we need to make sure that the function we create is marked as public. Normally, when we make a function, we just write void, then the name of the function. In our case, this would be something like quit, and then some curly brackets. But you can see that if we save this and go back into Unity, and then go and select our button, we add an on-click event. This means that whenever our button is clicked, it's going to notify whenever object we put in here. We're going to put the credits object because that's where our script is sitting. And as the function we want to call, we're going to go under credits. And in here, you can see that there's no quit method. So instead, we go into Visual Studio and we mark it as public. Now, when we save, we should see that when we try and search for a function, it appears. So let's select that. And now every time we click this button, this quit button, everything inside of these two curly brackets will happen. And we only want something very simple. We want to quit the application. So we go application.quit. We're not going to be able to see this happening because Unity won't actually quit the game when it's inside of Unity. Only when you export it will it actually close down the window. So we'll just throw a debug log statement as well. Let's say something like quit. Now if we play the game, hover over and click our button, you can see that the message quit appears in the console. And it will do this every time we click that button. Of course, when we export the game, we'll only be able to click it once. Awesome. Now, if you want, you can really easily take this scene and make it into a menu. To do that, we save it, and this one is going to be duplicate the credit scene, and let's rename this to something like menu or welcome screen, or something like that. And nothing changes, but we are now indeed viewing the menu scene. We can then change around some of the settings. Up here, we can say welcome to, then remove brackets here and change the made by to some name for the game. It's really popular to use some kind of twist on the word cube. Cube-tastic. Oh, that's cube. I'm just going to go with cube-thon. Yeah, it's marathon and cube combined. It's not good, but it's the best I've got right now. Let's bump up the font size and maybe also change the color to kind of a red, just to keep things interesting. Let's drag down the welcome to a little bit. Let's drag up the button, and we want to change some names here. So credits will be renamed to welcome. Thanks will be renamed to welcome to. Made by will be renamed to cube-thon. And the text of our button will be changed to start. Let's take all of these objects and move them down a little bit. Let's also go to a welcome object, before it was called credits, and remove the credit script. Let's instead add another script called menu. And in here, of course, we just want to create a single function that will start the game. Let's open it, clean up, and let's create again a public void. And we can't call it start because that's a function already created by Unity. So let's call it start game. And we want to load the next scene, so we'll be using Unity Engine .scene management, like we've done before, and we want to write scene manager .load scene, and the scene we want to load is the next scene. So we want to get the current scene. We're going scene manager .get active scene, then .build index, and then +1. If you're confused about what this does, check out the last video. Let's save this. Go into Unity. Now let's select our button. You can see that the onClick event is currently missing an object, so let's drag in the welcome object. Let's go into function and select menu, start game. Now the last thing we need to do in order to string all this together is go to file, build settings, and add all of our scenes into the build. Let's start by adding the menu, and we want this to be on top because we want this to be the first scene that we see. And then level 1, level 2, then level 3, and finally the credits. I'm also just going to take the two scripts here and drag them under the scripts folder, and that should actually be it. Our game should be fully playable with a menu screen, credits, and several levels. And if we're able to run this now, we're actually ready for the export phase. So let's hit play. It's going to say, welcome to cube-thon. Let's select start to start the game. You can see I'm in here on the first level that is really easy. It's going to say level complete. Go to the next level that is just a tiny bit harder. Again, level complete, and here comes the third level. And of course, you can make these levels as challenging as you want. And finally, because we completed all the levels, it's going to say thanks for playing and some credits. And then we have the button quit here. When we click that, it's going to say quit. And if this was an actual application, it would close down. So that's pretty much it for this video and this series. You made it all the way through. Congratulations on that, and congratulations on making your first step as a game developer. I decided to keep this video series pretty short so that most people would be able to complete it, but I definitely want to make more beginner-friendly videos. The new videos will just be on standalone subjects. I'm going to begin by making a video on exporting a game to different platforms, and we're going to use this as an example project. So definitely subscribe and stay tuned for more. So without further ado, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks to all of the awesome Patreon supporters who donated in March. And a special thanks to Derek Heemskirk, Faisal Verify, James Callahan, Jason the Tio. If you want to support the channel and become a patron yourself, you can do so at patreon.com/brownies. Thanks a lot, guys. In this video, we'll have a look at exporting a game from Unity to a platform of your choosing.
他就在讲那个要怎么样设置关卡，然后怎么样设置开始跟结束的这个页面。
Settings. Go File, build settings. Make sure to add all the themes you want in your build, and you can see here that we have a long list of platforms. The default one is the PC, Mac, and Linux standalone. You can easily switch to other platforms by simply selecting them and hitting the switch platform button. However, lately Unity has made the different platforms into optional modules that you can install with Unity. So in my case, I've installed PC, Mac, and Linux standalone, Android, and WebGL. However, I did not include any of the others. Luckily, we can simply select one of the modules. It's going to say that the module isn't loaded. We just hit open download page, and Unity will automatically start downloading that module. Simply run through the installer, restart Unity, and you should see it there. But no matter what platform we want to build for, there are a few things that we need to set up. The first one is to go to Edit, Project Settings, and then Quality. In here, we're able to set the different rendering settings. And the cool thing about this is that we can separate it into different levels. And we can have each platform default to a certain quality level. So right now, we are viewing our game at Fantastic. That means a pixel eye count of 4, full res texture quality, and so on and so on. But if we switch to the other levels, we can see these settings change. We can add new levels or delete some. I think we should go ahead and delete some of these levels. I'm going to delete the fastest, the simple, and the beautiful. I think 3 is plenty for our game. For Fantastic, I'm going to set the pixel light count to 10, keep the texture settings. I'm going to bump up the anti-aliasing to 8, and I'm going to leave all other settings as is. And for Good, I'm going to set the pixel light count to 4, anti-aliasing to 2, and keep all the other settings. And for Fast, we're going to have the pixel light count be 2, and I probably also want to have hard shadow zone. Cool, so this way we have 3 different quality levels. I'm going to set the standalone to Fantastic, Android, we can just go ahead and set that to Fast, and WebGL to Good. But you'll of course have to experiment with these settings depending on the complexity of your game. Next up, we need to change the player settings. To do that, go Edit, Project Settings, and then Player. And in here we have the different build settings. First off, we have the company name. I'm going to write Brockies. We have the product name. Let's write CubePlon. And then we can choose a default icon, and you can even change the cursor if you want to. I'm going to leave the cursor as is, but I do definitely want a build icon. Now, of course, you're going to have to create this somehow. I recommend using Photoshop or GIMP. In my case, I'm just going to take a screenshot of our game and then load that into Photoshop and edit it a bit. This way we can pretty easily create a cool looking icon for the game. But you should really go nuts and just have fun with it. Creating icons can be challenging, but it's also a really good thing to learn. All right, so when you're done with your logo, just save it as a PNG to make sure that you get the transparency you need. Or if you made it in Photoshop, you can just save it as a Photoshop file. So I'm just going to take this image here and save it directly into my project. So I'll go to how to make a video game and save it under assets. And I'm just going to call this one CubeThon, then icon. Save that. And on Unity, we should see it appearing. Make sure to select the icon and change the texture type to Sprite 2D and UI. And under compression, we'll select none. Let's save that. And that should give us some to make sure our image is pressed. Now we can go again, edit, project settings, player, and drag in our icon. So from here on out, it's going to depend on what platform you want to export to. So on the screen now, you will have some timestamps that you can jump to if you want to skip ahead to a specific platform. So if you want to build a standalone file, meaning PC, Mac,
这是我调它的对比度，深色增强。
With Linux, we need to change the player settings on this tab. First, we'll go resolution and presentation. Here we change whether or not we prefer to have the window in full screen or windowed mode. I think because we're making a casual game, we would like it to open up in windowed, and the default width and height is fine here. You can also choose whether or not you would like to display the resolution dialog. This is a small window that pops up before your game, which enables the player to choose their quality level and a preferred resolution. Again, since and a preferred resolution. Again, since this is a mini game, I think we should just disable this. We can also easily make the window resizable, and we can pretty much go ahead and support all aspect ratios. Then under your icon, we can just leave everything as is. It is going to go ahead and build different sizes of our icon for us. Under the splash image, we can configure stuff like the banner image shown in the dialog box. We of course don't have that enabled, so we don't care about that. And the splash screen that is going to show when you start up the game. Of course, if you are not using Unity Pro, your options here are going to be limited, but it's very cool that you can easily add different logos to the splash screen, customize the animation and the colors. You can always go ahead and hit preview, and it's going to show you what it will look like. In our case, I'm just going to change the background image to a white and change the splash style to dark on light. This way it fits better with the rest of our game. Finally, we have other settings. These can be important for larger games, but for now, you're definitely not going to need to change anything. Finally, we need to go to File, Build Settings, and this is where we choose our target platform. So again, here it's going to depend on whether or not you want to install for Windows or Mac. And again, I have some timestamps on the screen. So if you're building for Windows, you of course want to select Windows as the target platform. As the architecture, you'll have to choose between 32 and 64-bit. Almost any modern system will do fine running 64-bit. However, our game probably won't benefit too much from the difference here, so I'm just going to go on the safe side and choose 86, which is equal to 32-bit. We don't want to copy any files, and we don't want this to be a development build. So now we can just go ahead and hit build. We can go and make a new folder under the How to Make a Video Game project, and let's call this one builds. Inside of this, we can create another folder called Windows. And just to stay totally organized, we'll create yet another subfolder called x86. And in here, we can then write the name of our game. So that means Qthon, and then x86. And you can also write a version number for your game, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. So now Unity will build all of the necessary files and open up the folder. So you can see here that we now have an exe file with a nice icon and a data folder containing all the stuff necessary to run our game. If we run the exe, it's going to open up a new window with our game, and the game is already totally playable. However, these files here aren't too easy to distribute. You can of course go ahead and zip them up by right-clicking on the both, hitting send to, and then compress zip folder. And now you can send this single file to your friends, ask them to unzip it, and then play the game. But that's not too user-friendly. What most games do is create an installer. That means just a single file that you open up, and then you go through the install process. This way the user can choose where he wants the program to be installed. We can have desktop shortcuts, and an easy way to uninstall the game. Unity won't do that for us. We need some third-party software that will turn these files into a setup file. What I like to use is a program called Setup. So if you go to the description, there will be a link to this page. We then go down here and choose a download site. I'm going to go Setup 5.5.9.exe, choose random site, and it's going to start downloading. It's a very small program. You can then run through the installer, and once you're done, you can go ahead and open up Setup Compiler. So Setup allows you to customize so many things when it comes to creating the installer. In fact, it even allows you to edit the script file that makes it. But if you don't have experience creating these sort of files from scratch, let's face it, not a lot of people do, we can go and create a new script file using the script wizard. That's it. Okay, let's select this. And here we can fill out all of the information. Application name, Qthon, application version 1.0, publisher, keys, and I'm just going to link to my YouTube channel here. Select next. We'll just have the destination base folder be the program's file folder, and this is fine for the folder name. Select next, and this is where we need to tell the installer what files it needs to install on the system. So we'll go ahead and select browse, and now we need to find our project, our builds folder, and then our exe file. So I'm just going to go to desktop, projects, go to the How to Make a Video Game Unity project, go builds, Windows, x86, and select Qthon x86.exe. Hit open. So now we've linked it to the main executable file, but we also need to include all of the data. And this is where it becomes a little bit weird. You can make Setup also install all of the data within this folder, but when it does that, it doesn't include the folder itself, only all of its contents. That means that when we install it, we're going to have our Qthon x86.exe, and then at the same level, all of these files. But we need this to be in a separate folder, or else the exe cannot find the data it needs. To make sure this is what happens, we need to wrap this inside of yet another folder. So we'll go ahead and copy the name of this folder, create a new custom folder. Let's just name this one data, but then take the Qthon x86 data folder and move it to the newly created data folder. And now we can take our data folder and paste the name back in. This means that inside of our data folder is another data folder that contains everything we need. You can see the hierarchy up here. It's a bit weird that we need to do this, but as long as you know this trick, it works every time. So now we can go back to Setup, hit Add Folder. We can again locate our project, and once you get to the Windows x86 folder, you need to select the topmost Qthon data folder. Not the bottom one, or it's not going to work, but the folder we just made. Let's now hit OK, and it needs to include all the subfolders. We'll then hit Next, and you can choose the default settings you want here. I'm going to hit Next. You can even input a license file and show some information here and there. I'm just going to hit Next. English is fine as the language. So as the custom compiler output folder, we'll go ahead and hit Browse. Again, let's find our project, go to Builds. Then under Windows, let's go ahead and make a new folder, and let's call this one Installer. Let's hit OK. As the name of our output file, we'll set Qthon setup, and then x86 in parentheses. You can even include a custom setup icon file or a password. But I'm just going to use the default one, and I don't need that level of security. Let's then hit Next. finish, and in our setup we'll now go ahead and create a script with all of the settings that we just set. And you can go in here and change anything that you'd like. The scripting language is fairly easy to understand. Or you could just go ahead and compile the new script right away. Let's do that for any yes. And also choose the same script. It's a good idea if you want to go back and change something at a later point. So we'll just hit yes. Again, we'll go under builds. This time we'll go under Windows and installer, and we'll choose as the file name here, kubethon setup script. Let's hit save. It's going to go ahead and compile our file. You can see here it says finished. Now we can open up our builds, Windows installer folder, and in here we now have the kubethon setup x86.exe. And this file is now all we need to distribute. The script file here can just be totally ignored. Go ahead and delete it if we are satisfied with the results. Let's close down, setup and Unity. And if we now go ahead and run our setup file, we'll hit yes. We can go through the installer to our own program. I'm just going to install it in the default location. I'm going to create a desktop icon, hit install, and you can see that we get the option to launch kubethon and a shortcut down here to the game. So if we double click that, it is now going to boot up our game. And you can also uninstall the game as with any other program on your system. So if you want to build for Mac, you should of course change the target platform to Mac OS X. When it comes to distributing on the Mac, there are two main possibilities. The first one is using the Mac App Store. This can be quite a complicated process. You also need to change around a few of the build settings, and there's a lot of work to be done after you export it from Unity. You can also take your build and turn it into a DMG that you can then distribute through your website, Dropbox, or any other file sharing solution. I will have a link to a guide for both in the description. Let's have a look at actually building the game into an app. To do that, we first select the architecture. x86 means 32-bit, and _64 means 64-bit. Universal means that it will run on both, but this will also be twice as big. Any new computer will have no problem supporting 64-bit, but since our game is this small, we might as well choose 32. We don't want this to be a development build, so let's just go ahead and hit build. And as you can see, I've gone ahead and created a folder inside of our project called builds. Double click on that, and in here we can create a new folder. We'll call this one Mac, and inside that we'll create another subfolder called x86. So let's just go inside of the x86 folder and hit select. Unity is going to build everything for us, and it's going to open it like this. And it's a bit weird that Unity opens it this way. We'll just take the app folder here and move it inside of the x86. Now we can rename this to anything we'd like. I'm going to rename this to kubethon, then x86. Now on Windows, this is going to display as an ordinary folder. So we can simply open it and see all of the contents. But on Mac, this should display as an app that you can then just open up. If you want an easy way of sending this from one system to another, you can right click, go zip to, and then press zip folder. This will turn it into a zip file. We then remove the .app in the name here, and we now have a zip folder containing our app. And if you're building this on a Mac, again, you can either upload it to the Mac App Store or turning it into a DMG. Check the links in the description. So if you want to build for WebGL, select the WebGL platform. And again, if you haven't included this when installing Unity, make sure to click the open download page and download that module. There are not a lot of settings for this. However, we do need to have a look at the player settings. So let's click player settings, and let's go to the last tab here, which is for WebGL. Let's have a look under resolution and presentation. In here, you can choose a default screen width and height. This can very easily be modified later in the HTML. I'm just going to leave it as is. You can also choose a template. The default one includes a Unity logo, a way to maximize the screen, and maybe also the title of your game and stuff, and some other pretty handy things. I think for most people, it's a good idea to just choose the default one and then modify it. But you can, of course, also go with the tooltip. So I'm going to select default. WebGL doesn't include an icon, so that doesn't matter. On the splash image, we can customize the intro screen. You can see what it looks like right now if I hit preview. I've chosen a background color that's very white. As the splash style, I've chosen dark or light. You can also play with the animation, add custom logos, and of course some of these features are pro only, but I still think you can customize it a bit in the free version. Let's then go other settings. You can pretty much leave all these settings as is, and the same with the publishing settings. Some people prefer bumping up the WebGL memory size, but with the game this big, I think 256 is going to be just fine. So now we can just go ahead and hit build. And as you can see, I've created a builds folder inside of our How to Make a Video Game project. Let's go under that. Let's create another folder called WebGL. And under this one, let's create a folder called kubethon. Let's select that, select folder. Unity will now start building. Exporting from WebGL does take quite a bit of time, and it might look like it's getting stuck, especially at the last part here, but it will get there. So when it's done, it's going to open up the WebGL folder, and you can see our kubethon folder here with the different elements that make up our game. First up, we have the index HTML. This is what you run in order to display the game in your browser. We also have some template data. This is basically just some images, a bit of styling, and a JavaScript file that is referenced by our HTML file in order to display our game nicely. Under release, we have the files that actually make up our game. I've never actually come across an instance where I needed to mess with these. Only template data and index.html. So if we open up index.html, we get this error. It says that the browser does not support running this WebGL content locally, that we need to set it up on a server and then connect to it. We're going to click OK a couple of times. You can see the template, but the game isn't working. Of course, you can solve this problem if you have a web server, or you can create one yourself, but most of the time you probably want some way of running your game locally. So what we can do instead is use Firefox. If you don't have Firefox already, go ahead and download it, then right click and say open with Firefox. As of this video, Firefox supports running these games locally, and you can see it working just fine. It might take a little while before it boots though. So now we can actually play our game inside of the browser. But how can we distribute our game? Well, here we have a few different options. The first one is hosting your game yourself. If you've bought some server space, you can use a file management solution like FileZilla in order to upload your file to that server. But most people probably just want to host it on some kind of marketplace. The most common ones for indie games are probably Congregate and itch.io. I'll have links in the description on how to add Unity games to both of them. One thing that you sometimes have to do is to compress this folder. You do that by selecting the folder, right-clicking, going send to, and then compress the zip folder. On the Mac, you simply right-click and hit compress. We can also go in directly and edit the HTML. So if we right-click on this index file, we can open with some kind of text editing software. That could be Node++.
有没有办法就是直接把我电脑的画面投影到我就是墨水屏上面？ 它是使用 specific task，所以我们来下载这个。然后平板端也有下载。 这是我的电脑，这是我的墨水屏显示器，就是你可以看它们的显示效果。我是使用那个 Space Desk 这个软体去连接它们的，然后我觉得其实嗯，就是还挺跟手的，但是怎么说呢？墨水屏看起来比较护眼一点吧，但是有时候字体稍微小一点的字体，你就比较需要仔细的去观察，不然的话，你很难能够去看到它到底是什么样的字。不过整体来说还算不错，因为感觉真的对比起我的电脑来说，它比较不会那么刺激你的眼睛。